It's really simple to say, like, what do you want your logo to look like? It's a lot harder to say, what is the foundation of your company? Like, why are you here? You can't really get to the end finish line if you can't answer the fundamental question of why are you here?
Welcome back, everyone, to the Insurance Growth Lab. I'm Callan Harrington, and today I'm joined by Margeaux Giles. If that name sounds familiar, Margeaux was one of the early guests on That Worked, and I highly recommend checking out episode 7 to hear her full career journey. As a refresher, Margeaux is the founder and CEO of IRYS. IRYS is a modular management system completely shifting the way agents, brokers, and MGAs see their clients in business. They are fresh off a $12.5 million seed round announcement, which is an excellent seed round in this market. And odds are, if you're in the P&C insurance space, you've heard of IRYS and Margeaux. For this episode, we get right to it and dive deep on the rebrand they just went through.
We could have rebranded in 60 days. We could have said logo, color, slap some words on the page, bada bing, we got a new website, we got a rebrand. But when we got into that process, as a company, we wanted the brand to speak for what the culture of our company was. And that is so much more difficult to do than choosing a logo, choosing a color, and choosing some font type. It's almost like we went through an entire rebirth of the company and not just a logo change.
We talked about the details of the process, the tangible benefits they've seen, and what she would have done differently if they went through this again. You know, one of the most interesting things from the conversation was not just the external benefits they received, but the internal benefits and the impact that it's had on the culture of the company having gone through that process. This is one of those areas when it comes to rebranding that rarely gets talked about. And I gotta say, it was my favorite part of the conversation. So with that, let's get on to the show. All right, Margeaux, you're back.
All right. Yes, I am.
And you know, we were talking about this beforehand, and I highly recommend anybody who's listening to this go back and listen to that original the original That Worked podcast. That was a fun one.
Now.
You've had it is you were one of the
first ones, man.
Like one of the
pioneers.
Like early on, very early on. And so the one thing that I do kind of want to ask to kick this one off is, if anybody's listened to that, they know that you founded multiple companies.
Yes.
And that's not just in the insurance space. Now, you spent a long time in the insurance space, but you also founded companies outside of that. You know, and just to refresh somebody, you had a brokerage, sold the brokerage. You founded a consulting company within the insurance space, and then you founded a tech company. Now that this has been a few years with IRYS and a tech company, what do you think is the single biggest difference between those previous companies and IRYS?
Ooh, so almost all of my companies, like insurance, have been professional services based. They're like service based, like consulting. Saas is so different. It's almost like moving into retail because you have like a product, and that product has to have distribution. And even though that is the same on professional services side, there is an intrinsically different way to run a product company versus a professional services company. And inside into that is the way that it's funded and the way that you manage go-to-market strategies and things of that nature. They're just totally different animals. So it's been really exciting learning how to jump full into the fire hose, go into tech, go into SaaS, and then go into venture backed. It's just like, just do all the things at once. Yeah.
Yep. No, I believe it. In my journey I spent more time on the tech side than I did on the professional services side. So starting a professional services business. Now I had been part of a marketing agency before, which is where we brought on some of those people back into this with that insurance experience. But there was so much that was just different, and the go-to-markets are different. Although I will say, I think AI is going to make them very similar.
Yeah. I mean,
because it's going to be way more relationship based.
You're still a product. I mean, even though you're consulting and you're providing services, it's still a product, but it's somewhat different when it's like tangible product and you don't have
100%.
as much, you don't have as much leeway. You know, if it's you or a group of people selling services, you've got a lot of the ability to change and redirect quickly, as opposed to building something like software. If you need to change or redirect, it's definitely not as pivot on a dime as it was before.
I mean, what you just said was almost not identical, but so Chris Kessler, his episode was just released. He said that because he went from strategy consulting to Bold Penguin, and he said that that's what it was. He said when you go in with from a consulting perspective, you can throw out almost anything. When you go to a tech product, like you have to fit that mold of what you're selling for that tech product. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah. And there's just a delay. And like if I decide as a consultant, I want to offer a new line of business or product or, program, I can make up some marketing material and go, as opposed to a product, you got to have to like build it. It has to be tested. It's just a much longer process. So yeah, it's a little different.
What's been the number one challenge in that adjustment?
In the adjustment, it's for me personally, I am a very quick decision maker. We actually joke internally at IRYS that our band name would be Hard Pivot, like as a joke, because there's I mean, that's just my leadership style. If I see something isn't working the way that it needs to, we change it immediately. I don't care if it's 180 degrees difference. We're doing that. But that delay in, okay, we're changing a process or a product or a thing, and then we have to kind of go through these more formalized steps to get it into the market. That time delay is a killer for somebody like me who will stay up till 3 a.m. to get something, shipped out. There's still processes that you can't accelerate. You just have to go with the process. And for me, that's been just brutal, because like I'll get up and I'm like, I'm just going to teach myself how to code and I'll just release this feature by myself this evening. And that's never how that works.
What a perfect segue to dive into the actual campaign part of the episode, which users or listeners, I'm automatically
You're already back.
I'm right back. So for our listeners, we heard the feedback and it was love the show. We want more of the campaign. We want to go into the weeds deeper. We want to hear more about that. And that's been a big highlight of the show.
Yeah.
So we're going to dive in early. And Margeaux, we thought the perfect place to get the full breakdown was, and you just kind of touched on this. You said, like, I want to make decisions fast, but there's some that I just can't make overnight. You just went through a rebrand. So we're going to dive on deep into that. Where I would love to start on this is why? Why did you feel that you needed a rebrand just to begin with?
Okay. So starting a company, I mean, especially a startup, like if you're in a true startup scenario where you're starting from nothing and you're accelerating really quickly, the change time, like from year to year is so drastic. 1 year you could be at this place. And 6 months later, you've got a whole new staff and a whole new product. And then 6 months from that, it's something totally different. And so to me, the brand, we launched IRYS. We said, like, this is IRYS. Well, the brand will come later, like this is kind of how we feel about it, but we'll grow and evolve with time. And it's just that cycle, the regeneration cycle in startups is so compacted, right? As opposed to insurance, which in the insurance side, it's like the complete opposite. It's like you have this brand and this is your, this is what you stand on. And it just kind of doesn't really change over time because it's very narrow in its scope. But when you're like iterating as quickly as we were, the brand kind of goes stale. And so 3 years felt like an eternity. It was like a whole nother company had evolved after 3 years. And it just didn't feel like where we were in our process. And internally, we called it the glow up. And I joke about it because it's really more like the grow up. And you can see in the brand from where it started to where it is now, it's a maturity. Like you can see it in its maturity cycle. And I think that reflected the company. So we felt like we got to glow up. We got to do this.
So one, I love it. But, and for any of our listeners that don't necessarily know my background, but I was a revenue leader for over 15 years before starting my own thing. And this was always on my mind. always on my mind. Like, and it's exactly for the reasons that you just said. Yeah, I think they said in the High Growth Handbook, you have a totally different company every 6 months if you are growing at that.
If you're
if
going
you really
in
are
growth. Yes, you do.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yep.
And I've personally experienced that to the T. So one of the things that's always on your mind is, does the name of the company
any sense anymore? Yeah.
Yeah, it's exactly right. So that resonates with me to the T. But one of the things that it always would come down to is rebranding's a big project. That's not a small project. That is not something that you could say, hey, we're going to get this done in 30 days. Like, there's no way.
So
even if you're saying, oh,
I've said that. I think I might have said that. I'm like, whatever, 30 days, 60 days, it'll be fine. It was like a year. It was legitimately took like a year.
Do you think that maybe had something to do with what allowed you to pull the trigger initially? Meaning, like, because you only thought it was going to be 30 days, it was, oh, I don't mind jumping into this.
Yeah.
But it's like, we'll get this done in 30 days to position ourselves or whatever that might be. Well, or actually, like, what was the thought process around that?
So it was very superficial. It was like, hey, this doesn't look or feel like us anymore. Let's just, rebrand. And I think we would have rebranded regardless of how long it took. And I think that there's different levels of it too, because realistically, we could have rebranded in 60 days. We could have said logo, color, slap some words on the page, bada bing, we got a new website, we got to rebrand. But when we got into that process, it was a decision that's not the direction we wanted the rebrand to go. As a company, we wanted the brand to speak for what the culture of our company was. And that is so much more difficult to do than choosing a logo, choosing a color, and choosing some font type. That's a very different process. It's almost like we went through an entire rebirth of the company and not just a logo change,
Absolutely. Walk us through that. What did that process look like? So why was it more like a rebirth than, just how you're presenting this just on the surface?
Well, I think any good brand, in order to get to this end result, and we've all seen brands that were used, like, you love the brand, and maybe not so much in insurance, but definitely sometimes in tech and in e-commerce and retail. And the reason why is because, in my opinion, there's this intangible thing that connects to the essence of the company. And every other rebrand that kind of comes out that's cookie cutter, it's like you say the same thing, it's very broad and generic. And there was so much underneath the surface for us to get to the end result. There's 100 different things we had to consider. Who are we going to entrust to do the rebrand? There was a whole procurement process before. So we knew we wanted to rebrand, but it's kind of like if you're picking out a home designer, it's very artistic. It's like, you're not going to go to Joanna Gaines to get you a modern, sleek house. And you got to kind of find the right team. And so I think we landed on a team that we felt immediately connected with, but that team put us through, the ringer. And I appreciate what they did in digging deep and trying to get what the core of what we actually were out into the open, because eventually that led to the design that we have. And if not, we would not have connected with it as a company. And so I'm sure of a logo. It's really simple to say, what do you want your logo to look like? It's a lot harder to say, what is the foundation of your company? Why are you here? That's a question that is a lot of people, want to answer. Honestly, some of them we're here to make money. Some of them are here for an altruistic purpose. We want to change the way this process goes, or, for whatever that reason is. But you can't really get to the end finish line if you can't answer the fundamental question of, why are you here? What are you doing here? And that was so hard to answer. It was way harder to answer than I thought it was going to be.
Why was that?
We went through it was the stages of grief. We're here because we were users and we were mad and we didn't like the market and we wanted to do X amount with software and we felt unfairly and unjustly charged for bad products. So there's this long list, and it starts superficial and it starts to go underneath. But at the end of it, we came because we needed to change fundamentally how in technology and insurance brokerages in particular had a relationship. And that relationship when we dug under one level under that was what we really wanted to do was sell the right insurance to our clients and foster trust back with the people that we were trying to sell our products to. Because we come from an insurance background, not necessarily a tech background. So our dig deep was a little bit more than I think a normal SaaS or normal tech company would be, in that we felt deeply connected to our user base because we are our user base. So it was a little harder to get all the way down underneath, like, what are we actually doing here? And I think it was, if you look at our branding, obviously we're rebels. Our archetype ended up landing in that rebel space, like bucking the status quo, stepping out of line, asking questions. Why are we doing this? And getting to that mindset. But that was many levels of discovery sessions to get down to the, like, what are we actually doing here? Yeah.
What did those discovery sessions look like? Was that, was that them coming in and interviewing, them being the marketing agency coming in, interviewing you? How did they pull this out of you?
A long process. And we made it so much more difficult, right, than it needed to be. But I think part of that was because intrinsically, we were not as a team all aligned. And so our answers to that were kind of everywhere, but pulling that out, look, it took many forms. There was like a lot of workshops. So they'd come in and we'd have these like Figma screens or these kind of fun, interactive, virtual conferences. And we would ask random questions and answers. And a lot of it was like, what are you doing? Why do you love this? What do you like building? Just that kind of stuff. And then on top of that, internally, the executive team at IRYS had many sessions, not to like go into too much detail, but when I tell you that there was like fighting happening, there was all of us had very different opinions on how and why and where this should turn out. And anytime we had those disagreements, we were always at the surface level. It was like about the color or about the word or about the thing. But I kept trying to, as an executive team internally, go back underneath and say, but we're all here because we all agree on this very basic concept that technology and insurance should have a different relationship with each other. And then we'd be like, oh, you know what? You're right. We all actually believe that. Now let's not fight about the font size. Do you know what I mean?
So how did you get to some of those final decisions on the specifics? Did you have to go in and just say, look, at the end of the day, I'm the CEO. This is what we're doing.
How dare you?
Or was or was it that you just continued to have these conversations until people kind of settled on whatever? Like you drew consensus to come with what that was.
Well, consensus to me is intrinsically important to our company. So like I don't govern, I don't rule by dictatorship. It's very important to me that our fundamental like founding members of IRYS have they all kind of come together and have that similar need and want. I think I probably went too collaborative because I love the energy of collaborating and building and creating. It's like who I am. And so getting in a room and having all those voices and everything was wonderful. It was therapeutic. We all kind of got to see where we all are coming from. But there came a point where it was like, okay, now we're just beating the dead horse. We all know where we stand on it. And ultimately we have to have a decision maker. And so I took the responsibility of making the final decision. And one of the things that I constantly had to remind my team is brand and voice and messaging. You cannot look at these things in silos. So like it's a grouping of things. It's the color plus the typography plus the logo plus the message plus everything. And so not every part of that is going to be your most favorite thing, right? Like I loved this logo, but did the logo make context in the larger brand not as well as a logo that I had as a second choice? So I constantly, I had to come in and make final decisions that not everybody loved, but two, I had to look at it holistically and not individually, because a brand is a group of emotion, right? You can't nitpick on a type form or a size or a color if it holistically doesn't make sense as part of the brand.
So you got to the point where you went through all these discovery exercises. One of the things that in our conversations you've talked about was that you weren't expecting was the impact that those discussions had internally. Can you give us some examples of that?
We did. So a good example of highlighting why this is important. We did an exercise early on in the rebrand where we basically just gave very little information to our employees and said, what is IRYS? Like, not how do you feel, but like, just what is IRYS? And we asked them with no context, no minimum word count, just write us back in Slack. What does that mean? And we tell the story because it was so wildly different from employee to employee. And in length, in description, some of them talked about the tech, some of them talked about the underlying culture, some of them talked about the insurance industry in general. So that indication to me was, okay, we are not aligned internally on the basics of what IRYS is. And there's no way that a branding company is going to get the result if we don't even understand the result together. And so for us, it was like, we went through these exercises and we tried to get people on the same page and we tried to get the message of what we were doing and why we were doing it a little bit more cohesive. And from there, kind of dominoes fell into place, right? Then everybody kind of got, okay, we understand. And the biggest thing that the branding company did for us that I think was really important was something they call, and I'll link them. We can link them in the chat if they want, but an idea worth rallying around, which is basically like a sentence about you, whether it's the company, whether it's going to be external, a slogan, or if it's really internal. We took this so seriously. Like, we had 17 iterations of what our rally cry was really. But we ultimately settled on step out of line. And step out of line really encompassed what the culture of IRYS was going to be. Not just because we were stepping out of line and we were getting out of the rat race and saying we're going to do something different, but like internally when we're meeting with staff members or we're having collaborative discussions or we're designing the software, there is no scenario in which we don't encourage people to step out of the way that they're typically thinking and throw some crazy idea against the wall. And so for us, like, once we had the understanding of what IRYS was and we had this idea, this rally cry, it became a lot easier to figure out what the colors and typography were because it just made a lot of sense from there on.
Yeah. It kind of greased the wheels to be able to get the design elements in place.
We had
Is that
so
right?
many good we had so many good rally cries. Like there was like leave your mark, step out of line, set truth free. I mean, there were so many good ones, but ultimately the rebel attitude of just not wanting to accept status quo for the sake of status quo was what we ended up landing on.
So you go through this discovery process. You get all the design assets, the brand guidelines, the color palettes, the logos, and everything else through. One of the things that I'm curious about before we kind of get to, what was your process for getting the actual brand out was, did you think about the name? And was that in and to be clear, I'm not saying I like the name.
No, it's fine.
I'm curious. So in full disclosure, we're going through this internally, and I'm keeping the name. And not that I mean, I'll just be honest. I don't even love our name is the reality. A lot of people like the name, but and I'm not saying I dislike the name. I actually do. I don't have this deep personal
like, it's not like deeply seated name. Yes,
that's exactly right. Yeah. So we're doing something very similar to what you did. Was that ever on the table, or was that what was the ultimate decision around that? Like, what, or actually, can you walk us through that process?
Yeah, I mean, so IRYS, I did love the name IRYS. It did have some meaning to us. It's kind of, we decided on it. I think we might have talked about this before, but IRYS is the Greek goddess of Olympus who delivers messages between the gods and mortal men. So to us, that felt very apropos to what we were trying to accomplish with IRYS. So we had an emotional attachment to the name, but honestly, when you run a software company, like, everything is tied to your URLs. Everything's like, the undertaking of changing the name was just, in my opinion, wasn't worth the output.
Yeah.
Plus we like a name, like branding is one thing, but the name has its own life form. So like changing IRYS to something completely not IRYS felt too much of a shift for us. And we weren't changing the company. We were, like I said, we were glowing up. We were growing up. We weren't necessarily pivoting. And so it felt like, if you want a really massive shift in culture and a massive shift in your company, the naming seems like a great place to go. But if you're just kind of gradually, I don't know, we loved the idea of keeping the name.
Well, what I'm hearing is the name was still rooted in the core belief.
It still made sense as a core of our company. Yes, 100%.
And since you liked it and it was core to your belief just to begin with, it still works. So it wasn't.
100%.
And I know what you're saying. Like you're in a tech company, it's even worse because when you go to log in, like let's use Salesforce as an example, you're logging into salesforce.com.
You change salesforce.com as a whole situation. Like it's a whole build. Yeah. So it better be really worth it if you're going to change it.
That makes complete sense. Okay. So you've got all the assets, you have everything. How did you launch it? What did that launch process look like?
So, and I have talked about this. I'm like a firm believer in creating frameworks and then letting people have creative control, like individuals being able to do creative things on their own. And we took that same approach with IRYS. Our marketing, we have a very tight framework where we say, okay, we're going to do an initiative. In this case, it was a rebrand. And that initiative is going to last a quarter. Usually it's a quarter. Sometimes it can be more or less. And we're going to funnel that through our framework. We're going to talk about thought leadership. We're going to talk about education. And we're going to talk about how this translates itself into our product. Those are kind of our core pillars. And so it was really easy to run the rebrand through that framework, which was a lot of discussion on the front end of the rebrand as to why we and being transparent. Like we are rebranding. We don't want to be like, shoo, here we are, a new thing. We want our clients and our future clients and our investors to understand why we were rebranding and why it was so critical and important. And I feel like that created that thought leadership piece, which if you guys have followed us on social, you're part of our newsletter or email list, like we started this a month ago, talking about what we were going to do, why we were rebranding. And we dug into it. We talked about why we chose the colors and what the typography meant and how it meant to us and each individual employee was able to voice why they chose the thing. So we got really heavy into the rebrand instead of saying, okay, well, on December 1, it's old IRYS and December 2nd, it's new IRYS. We really focused a lot on the rebrand itself as an important part of it. And then we moved in from thought leadership into education. And that's kind of the stuff we're doing now. Like, why should insurance and companies or insurtechs care about their brand? That's a deep question. Why would we spend all this time and money and educating people on how growing a company will require you to do these things from time to time, whether it's rebranding or buying new tech, right? Like it's the same process. Yeah. When you get to a certain point, you have to be able to evolve. And then we move it into products. So now you'll see, like, we'll start talking about how these new images and the new style we have is going to manifest in the product itself and how that sort of drove what our new feature sets were going to be in Q4. So if we follow that framework, it was actually really easy. I was able to hand that over to my employees and they had creative leeway to do a lot of that stuff. And we talked a lot, you and I have talked a lot too, about the importance of like asset libraries and just in general having these frameworks. So we spent time on the front end before we actually launched, and we actually delayed our launch by 60 days to do this, was to go in and build asset libraries and all of these individual pieces so that our employees that aren't even in marketing and aren't even in social had the ability to then show the world how they interpret our brand, but with it still being within our brand guidelines. And we spend a lot of time on, creating social posts and announcements posts and having this framework so that we have the ability to move fast down the road and we're not having to like create every individual asset, which is like frameworks clearly is like a thing that we have internally in IRYS.
No, there's no, when we started working together and we were doing through the discovery and you were walking us through your content process, one of the first things I said, I was like, this is really dialed in. Like, this is a machine. This is like, in my opinion, this is a very true machine. And one of the things I'd love to dive into a bit, you had talked about this and you said, when we launch this, I feel our content got better. Why is that?
I think the content got better because the expectation was better. One, right? Like we when you go through a rebrand, you put emphasis on how this now looks externally. But I will go back to the original, like the crux of this, which is when we became internally aligned, when everybody in the company felt connected to why we were here, our messaging, our archetype, our visuals, it manifested itself externally with better content. And there's just no two ways about that. If I look at our content before, it felt very like, gotta write some content. You know what I mean? Like I gotta get some content out.
No, absolutely.
You know, and being truthful, like I hated it. I was like, can we this rebrand cannot come fast enough for me? But and that wasn't a dig on anybody other than it was content for the sake of content, as opposed to having not just one writer, but now everybody in our company participates in this. The content is directly tied to a mission. And that's like so human. No one wants to write, and I love our industry, but like it's insurance technology. It's just not always exciting. It's like no one wants to write bland material or make infographics if there's nothing connecting them to the output of that. So when we identified the rebel and we identified that we were here to create a movement, the content creation became a movement as opposed to a thing that we needed to check off the list to put on the calendar today.
That's interesting. And I do get what you're saying. I didn't realize that connection, but before I was doing a ton of content on sales broadly, like broad sales content. And then it started to get into a lot of sales leadership just because I was in sales leadership for a long time. It
becomes so bland.
I couldn't, I just didn't want to write it anymore. And I stopped.
I was like, write that.
Yeah, I was gaining a lot of followers. I was getting a lot of activity on my posts, but I found myself in this echo chamber when I was writing about things I just didn't want to write about anymore. Like I wasn't excited. That's like so much of writing and content is just what's your excitement behind what you're doing.
But it seems crazy though, because that's like so woo-woo and spiritual, like because there is this like intangible quality to like you're like the words might be the same, but your intention behind them are different, and therefore they're received.
1,000%.
They're just received differently. And I think it was as we move into this like AI, because we talk a lot about like there's so much AI now, it's like almost impossible to navigate through social. That intangible quality behind it is literally the soulless AI. It's the missing piece of what you can tell is either written by AI or written by somebody who's like actually experiencing that and feeling it. You can tell. And I don't necessarily know how to put my finger on it other than, and I think everybody who has ever scrolled through LinkedIn, because LinkedIn's the worst as far as like, homogenized leader content, you can just tell. I don't know how, but it's just like, and so if you guys have followed me at all, I had the same existential crisis as you, and I was posting a lot and I was writing and I'm just like, I don't feel this. And so in order to get back into the groove, I did a 180 and I started posting about non-insurance, non-technology, random things. Like I'm going through a home remodel. And I was like, you know what? Right now in my life, I'm going through a massive home renovation and it's just consuming my thoughts. And all of my thoughts are kind of around this topic. And I'm just going to talk about it. And I know it's not LinkedIn. And I know, what was the one that everybody loved? Like, I didn't learn anything about B2B Saas through writing it, right? Like you're not going to increase your sales by reading my content, but it felt authentic. And it's some of the most viral content that I've ever had or shared on that platform. And so that's that intangible, I think.
I agree with that. And I think as we get into this next era, right, this where like the barrier to write quality content is at its lowest it's ever been because AI is a good writer. It's just a truth.
It's a good writer.
And
yeah.
But you won't separate yourself from it unless you feel what you're talking about. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's like, unless you're there and then you have to be talking about a subject that you really care about in order to do that. And I found that just with this podcast in general, because it is so wired into the actual insurance space. I get more excited to write it. I get more excited to comment on it. So that makes sense to me. That makes complete sense to me.
Yeah. And insurance in general, like it's so funny to see not just insurtechs, but also like insurance companies. And we've talked a lot about this brand that we all have, that when I say we, because I still very much involved in insurance brokerages and agencies, it's like been this, I don't want to, it's like static. It's been this very, it's like, I'm client centric and we're family oriented and we're community focused and we're here in your time of need. And you say the words, but there's not a lot behind the words, meaning they're not necessarily investing in, community events. They're not doing the Little League football sponsorship anymore. And so as we go through this process, I see in this long range, this separation of companies that are trying to use technology or AI to get the quick likes. Because you can do that. You can pump out a ton of content.
Absolutely.
You can get followers, you can get likes, you can sell products using this like sort of robotic process. But it takes longer and it's much harder to actually create that content, that true human centric content. But I'm telling you guys, it hockey sticks once it hits, because this is the new way to separate yourself from the crowd. And if you follow the news, and I'm like an AI junkie, OpenAI is kind of toyed with the possibility of opening up their own social platform. I don't know if you read this yet. And
I haven't, no.
And X is kind of, there's some spinoffs there too, but OpenAI was toying with the notion of creating an completely AI generated social platform. Everything on that is AI, and you just go and you interact with AI. I don't know, maybe this is an older lady of years, and I'm just like, I don't want to interact with AI for my social content.
It sounds terrible.
It sounds terrible. If AI is going to help me get a coffee faster, if it's going to help me get my claims settled, but like to my artistic, because there's like this artistic quality to it. I don't want my art necessarily all to be made by AI. I don't want somebody's opinion. That's personal. That's human. Like that is what's missing from that. I think it's underrated. I think that's why you're seeing like the LinkedIn, also social stuff kind of ebb and flow between really AI generated content and then just like very, very raw, unedited, spelling error, human content.
Well, I think people are specifically, I notice, I'll do it in text. I won't even lie about that. I will specifically put errors so people know that this is not AI. And it does pain me. I am like a Grammarly, I'm like a Grammarly loyalist forever. And like I will purposely do that now.
I do it on LinkedIn now.
If you started this process all over again, what would you do differently at the beginning?
Oh, I don't know if I would do anything different. Because I think the process and the journey, like, again, it was ups and downs. It was a lot of deep digging. We would not have had the outcome that we got without that process. And the process was not straightforward, and it wasn't pretty, and it wasn't fun always. And there was a lot of back and forth. But I genuinely believe that anything that you do that's worth doing is going to have that journey. And I don't think that branding is any different there. I think it's the same.
Let me ask you this. What advice would you give yourself? Having gone through this now, looking back, how you were feeling when you were thinking about even doing this and moving forward or starting it, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh, don't nitpicking. God, I'm the worst. I'm such a Like I want perfection on like all levels of everything. And I would have told myself, you're going to get there in the end. Like the end is coming. And the nitpicking and the obsessing of perfection is not going to change that. My husband jokes a lot. We talk about the concept of running in the airport. If you've ever heard this concept, it's like, there's no reason to run in the airport. You're either going to get to your flight or you're not. And your pace, your little 1 minute save that you're doing for running through the airport, ultimately, cumulatively, is not going to make you make or miss the plane in 90% of the times. And so it's a similar thing. It's like, don't run in the airport. Like, don't overanalyze every little piece of this, because if you are doing the work underneath, the outcome will be reflective of that work.
Fun fact about that, I just about missed my talk at the last InsurTech New York event because I had to run because they were paging me over the thing.
So you win, and I actually
I had to run. I had to run.
Because I did that one. I was like, I did actually make one flight because I ran. But most of the time,
but
in your wheels.
Point taken for sure. Margeaux, this was great. I know this will be helpful to a lot of people that are going through this. I guess last question I have for you on this one is when, a lot of companies of all ages, of course, think about this. Even some of the oldest companies that have been around think about this. When do you think the timing is right to do this? Meaning, is there a time where it's too early, too late? What is your thoughts having gone through this?
I feel like it's like any other big change. There's never like a perfect time ever. We did kind of move the brand launch around a bit to coincide with, some of the like business strides that we were making, like becoming generally available, finally being able to sell into SMB and not just enterprise. And so we timed it to release in that way so that we could build the momentum of not just the brand, but then this sort of new phase of IRYS. So I think, there is some meticulous planning in that case, but like to start the process and to start going through the process, I just don't know if you're ever really ready. I honestly, it's so funny because it reminds me of like what I say to clients when they're like adopting new tech. It's the similar scenario. It's like, you need to shoot for an end goal. If you have a clear end goal in mind of what it is you're going to do, then you just have to go through the messy middle. I mean, there's no good time for that.
That's a perfect segue to wrap this up. Margeaux, thanks for coming on. This was great. I knew it would be, and I appreciate you coming on and just being so open and honest about everything.
Always. And check out the Rebrand because it's super awesome.
I hope you enjoyed Margeaux and I's conversation. I could talk about branding all day as it's one of my favorite subjects. If you want to learn more about Margeaux, you could find her on LinkedIn in the show notes. Also, if you like this episode, you could find me on LinkedIn to let me know. And if you really want to support the show, subscribe to us on YouTube or give us a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. It is always very much appreciated. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'll see you next week.